Welcome to Decode Your Burnout, the podcast where we crack the code on burnout based on three primary factors: your programming, environment, and personality. We also feature experts who debunk the myths about what it takes to be successful in their industry and spin those tips to fit the workplace so you can optimize the way you work. I'm your host, Dr. Sharon Grossman, a psychologist turned coach, author, and burnout expert. If you're burned out and want to go from exhausted to extraordinary, book a free breakthrough session with me by going to bookachatwithsharon.com. And if you want to see how you're doing and what to focus on next, download the Burnout Checklist. You'll find the link in the show notes or go to bit.ly/checkyourburnout. Now let's get started. Hello, Decode Your Burnout fans, and welcome to another episode with me, Dr. Sharon Grossman. And I am so pleased to welcome Amy Armstrong to the show today because she is going to talk to us about how to set boundaries to reduce conflict. Now, Amy is a coach and coach trainer, and she spends her days listening to moms and dads fight over kids and money. She helps parents set boundaries and solve problems so they can reduce stress, save money, and get their kids out of the middle of adult conflict. She brought coaching to the arena of family court and champions innovative practices to transform the domestic court system. Can you understand why I've brought her on here? That's right, because all of this conflict just creates a whole bunch of stress, and that can certainly lead to burnout. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm really happy to be here. It's kind of, I don't know what it says about me that I love to talk about conflict, but that's definitely my gig.
Well, somebody needs to talk about this. And it's kind of similar to how people don't really like to talk about burnout, but that's where I show up. So as long as we are passionate about the work that we do, then we're doing important work and helping people with these really important issues. So I'm glad that you're talking about it. Tell us how you got into this work.
Sure. Sharon, I started off teaching parenting when my kids were little, and I really enjoyed teaching, just good, positive parenting skills and bringing it mostly into my community, and then lots of groups, and help me get out and get into different parts of the city and connect with people. And when I started going through my own divorce, I was working with a community agency doing parent education, and a magistrate from our local court asked us to specifically offer a course for parents when they were splitting up and going into two separate homes. And I volunteered to write the curriculum and start teaching it, which was fascinating. And as I started teaching that class, people started coming to me with questions and wanting me to work with them one-on-one, which, I wasn't really trained to do. So I went, and I've done two coaching certification programs, one specific to parenting and one that got me into the International Coach Federation competencies and standards and, that global network. And I find that coaching can touch parents in a way that education simply can't. You can imagine how many thousands of resources parents read every day, books, articles, podcasts, you name it. And it's the coaching piece that really helps people figure out how they can make it work for them, right? Reading about it, hearing about it may or may not be helpful, but it's the coaching that can really make it come alive for them. And so I started coaching parents that were going through separation and divorce. And as you can imagine, the stories were just all over the board. And so, my whole program has developed from there really over about the last 12 years, where I now have gotten to a point where I coach a lot of court-involved families where they're actually getting court orders to work with me. And then I developed a training program to teach other people to coach this population as well.
So you started out having gone through your own divorce, then helping other people going through divorce, and then it evolved from there.
Exactly.
And what you really specialize in this is talking about how they can set some boundaries to reduce that conflict. Now, when we think about setting boundaries, what do you think are some of the biggest myths that are out there in order to maybe not be in a state of conflict with another person? I know so many people who go through divorces end up in conflict because they don't really know how to navigate it. And unfortunately, it's not something that we're taught how to navigate, right? Until you're already in it and emotions are running high. So people probably have all kinds of notions about how to do it, or maybe don't even have the know-how. So I obviously see a lot of value in the work that you do, but help us understand what you're seeing from your field. And then we'll talk about how we can apply some of these tips and strategies to people who are looking to prevent or avoid conflict in their own lives, regardless of whether they're getting divorced or not.
Wonderful. I appreciate that approach. So I would say, Sharon, one of the first myths is that resolving conflict is all about compromise. And compromise actually leaves people feeling like they have to give up something. And what I have found in my work is that when people feel really validated, like even to the point where I let them know they each get to keep their own version of history. We are not here to try to come up with one story that you can both agree on. You're each fully in your values, fully in your story, fully in your own experience. It's your lived experience and you get to keep it. And when that happens and people feel truly validated, their guard comes down and solutions naturally emerge. So instead of just saying you have to give up half of what you want and you have to give up half of what you want, let's focus on having the real conversations about what's really important to both of us and let the solutions emerge organically.
Wow, that's really powerful. And so when I'm hearing you talk about this, I'm thinking about people who are maybe working in an organization where there's a lot of conflict, maybe some backstabbing, things like that are happening. I mean, I've heard stories where people aren't speaking to colleagues of theirs and they cross each other's paths every day and they're going to meetings all the time together. And there's just that real staleness in the air because they're not able to overcome it. Maybe they don't know how. Maybe they're worried about what's going to happen. But I think it's an important message that we have to validate the other person. And I also want to add to that, which is something that is always important when we're in these situations, especially when we feel wronged, that validating the other person doesn't mean that they're right and you're wrong. What it 100%. Means is, right? And I think that's such an important piece of it that keeps people from going down this road of validating. It's like we see things too black and white. So we have to really kind of bring ourselves back to this notion of everybody is right from their perspective. Everybody has their own feelings, their own thoughts, their own belief systems. And if we can just validate where they're coming from, even if we don't agree, then we can start having a conversation about how to solve whatever the issue is and get beyond just all of the feelings and the ego.
I love how you said that. And I would suggest that people learn a few phrases that they can choose from that help them do that. For example, if you and I were going to disagree on something and I want to validate your perspective, I could say, okay, we're not on the same page. We totally get that we see it differently. You see it like this, and I see it like that. That's validating, but it's also reminding the person that I'm simply summarizing our differences. I'm not going to show your point of view in a way that's going to make me feel like I'm empathizing too much with you, that would compromise my own point. Another option might be to say, oh, I can tell that you're most worried about X and I'm most worried about Y. So again, stating this, very validating. And I'll tell you one thing that comes up a lot, even when there's teams at work where people just don't click, just don't get along and aren't friends, aren't friendly outside of the meetings. People have the wrong idea that boundaries are always about saying no. And I prefer to live in what I call the yes energy. Let's talk about the yes. What am I willing and able to do? What's pro me, not anti you, right? So if your teammate is saying, well, I'm going to do this part and you're going to do this part, and you're like, I'm not staying late on Friday to get that done. You can say, sure, I'll be glad to take a look at that on Monday. Right. Okay, so we talk about what we are willing to do, where we can put some energy, because resistance leads to burnout.
So there's so much to unpack in what you just said. And so I want to go back to the first point, which is this whole idea of validating. And I'm so glad that you brought very concrete examples of a phrase that we can use, because what it illustrates is how just by summarizing the facts of what you believe and what I believe, or what you want and what I want, what you're worried about and what I'm worried about, we're just holding the space for both of our pieces of the puzzle. And we're not saying one's right and one's wrong. It's like we both have our own standpoints on this issue. Here's what they are. And we're just focusing on that. And that when you get into that kind of logical